Welcome to episode 57 of Norse Myths, Legends, and Folktales. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we learn what became of Thorkill and his company, the journey of the two princes named Eric and Helgi in part 2 of the Land of the Not Dead and Many Marvels. From the halls of torture the bold seafarers passed to a chamber of treasures, where the air was sweet. Fair indeed was the spectacle to behold. Tankards of mead stood around them. These were encircled with fine gold and decorated with rings of silver. Among the treasures were a gleaming ivory tusk, circled with gold, a golden armlet, and a great drinking horn, graven with pictures and set with sparkling gems. 3 men with covetous hearts could resist not their desire to be possessed of these rare treasures, and seized them greedily. Then did they pay life's cost for their boldness. The tusk became a sword, which pierced the heart of him who laid hands upon it. The armlet became a venomous snake, which stung to death the man who held it, and the great horn was transformed into a fiery dragon, which devoured the robbers. The other men were stricken anew with terror and that dread land, and they all feared they would share the fate of their companions. But they passed in safety to another chamber, which had greater splendor than that which they left it. It was filled with shining armor and bright weapons and rich apparel, radiant with silver and gold, and ablaze with jewels. Fairest of all were a great king's robe, with his splendid headgear and his graven gem-decked waist-belt. Thorkill, who had warned others, could not resist his desire to possess some of the rare treasure, so impulsively he seized the royal mantle. Then did dire disaster threaten them. The chamber tottered as if shaken by earthquake. Women's screams were heard, and wailing voices asked if these despoilers were to be endured any longer. The whole dwelling was stirred with noisy alarm. Monstrous beings who seemed to lie dead sprang suddenly to their feet, menacing and horrible, and with hordes of wail and shadowy furies made fierce attack upon the strangers, who were beget with awesome peril. It was well for Thorkill and the others, and the skilled archers, Broder and Bushi, were with them, for they bent their bows and shot magic arrows against the assailing horde. Spears were also cast, and deadly missiles were flung from ready slings. So were the Furies beaten back, although many men fell to be torn asunder by monsters. Those who survived made speedy escape from Geirrod's dwelling and from the city of the not dead, and returned to Gudmund, who waited for them as he had promised. Then did the giant ferry them over the river and take them unto his own dwelling. Again they were feasted, and again did they resist the temptation to partake of the food and wine, and have the brides, the demon maids, that were offered to them. But Buchi, the archer, was stricken with love for the daughter of Gudmund, and he was driven insane by her embrace. He, who contended against the monsters in Geirrod's dwelling, was overcome by a maiden of gentle seeming, and he never again returned to his native land. For when Thorkill and the king took their departure, he followed them towards the shore, but he was caught in a river and dashed to death. The king and Thorkill, mourning for those who had fallen, and especially Bushi, made haste to leave the land of terror, but their voyage homeward was beset with perils. The seas wallowed in tempest, and the galleys were driven hither and thither by contrary winds, so they suffered great delay. The food stores were at length exhausted, and many died of hunger. Prayers made to divers gods without avail, but at length the king made vows and offerings to Utgard Loki, whereat the seas were calmed, and a favorable wind drove the vessels towards the haven of home. Of the 300 men who had set forth to visit the land of the not dead, but 20 returned to Denmark. The king sought not further adventures over perilous seas towards distant lands. He lived at peace after sore travail, and he engaged in meditation regarding the mysteries of life and death. Certain teachers convinced him that to men's souls immortal life is given, and Gorm wondered whether the god would cause him to suffer torture or reward him with bliss, because that he had spent his days in adoration and had given peace offerings. Now, the god whom the king favored most was Loki, and his friends counseled him that he should send Thorkill to appease that deity in the land of night. They also made grave accusations of treachery against the brave seafarer, who waxed wroth and demanded that these evil advisers of the king should accompany him on his fearsome voyage. Gorm forced the men to sail with Thorkill, and unwillingly they went forth to face the perils of the unknown. Great were the sufferings of the men who went towards the dwelling of Loki. Many died from starvation ere they came to the land of eternal darkness. At length they reached a rocky shore on which there was a black, tremendous precipice. Thorkill and his companions went ashore, and they came to the narrow entrance of a vast cavern. Iron benches were seen within by the light of the torches carried, and they perceived that the floor swarmed with venomous snakes. They went inward on a rocky ledge, and passed a warm and foul river, and afterwards entered a chamber which reeked with loathsome vapor and was strewn with slime. Then did they behold Loki. He was bound to the rock with great fetters. So long had he lain there that his hair and his beard had grown hard as elk horns. Desiring to return homeward with proof of his achievement, Thorkill snatched out a single hair of Loki's beard, whereat a foul stench came forth. Then flying serpents made attack upon the strangers, spouting venom which caused limbs to wither and heads to be struck off, so that but few men escaped to the galleys. When Thorkill returned to Denmark, he was so greatly disfigured by the venom that his friends hardly knew him. He went to the king and related all he had seen and what had happened to him, and he showed the horn-like hair of Loki's beard, from which deadly fumes escaped and suffocated several who were nigh. Gorm was terror-stricken when he came to know of the horrors of the foul dwelling of his favorite god, Loki, and he fell back dead ere Thorkill had finished his tale. Beyond the realms of torture are the glittering plains, where good men and women who have died upon earth live ever in bliss and amidst scenes of beauty. This part of the other world is called Odinsaker, the acre of the not dead, and Jord Lif and Unmana, the earth of living men. Eric, a prince of Denmark, made a vow that he would go thither, and another prince from Norway, who was named Eric, also set forth with him, and their followers towards the east, and they journeyed a great distance beyond India until they reached a dark forest, in a land where the sun never shone and the stars were beholden by day. Onward they went through perilous places until there was light again. They came at length to a river which was spanned by a bridge of stone, and on the other side was a green and level plain. A great dragon stood upon the bridge, keeping constant guard, and its jaws gaped wide, issuing forth flame and smoke. Eric of Denmark feared to go farther, and said they must needs return. But Eric of Norway drew his sword, and seizing the right hand of one of his followers, rushed forward with him. In horror and anguish the others beheld the two men vanishing in the dragon's jaws, so they mourned for them greatly, and returned home by the way they had come. Many years passed by, and at length Eric of Norway and his companion appeared in their native land. They told that when they were nigh to the dragon they were blinded by smoke, but they pressed on. Soon the air was cleared, and they found that they had crossed the bridge and were traveling over a glittering plain, which was covered with gleaming flowers that gave forth sweet odors. It was ever summer there, and ever bright and warm, but there were no shadows cast by flowers or trees or living beings. They journeyed on until they saw a beauteous tower suspended in midair. A ladder hung from it, and they climbed towards the door. Fair was the room they entered. The carpet was of hushing velvet, and on a gleaming table, which was laden with rich dainties, stood dishes of silver and wine goblets of graven gold. Sumptuous beds were in the tower also, and the air was filled with faint perfume. Eric and his companion were made glad, because they deemed they had at length come to Odinsaker. Now, while Eric lay in soft slumber, there appeared before him a shining youth, who was his guardian spirit, and he asked the prince if he desired to remain there forever. But Eric said that it was his desire to return so that he might relate the wonders he had beheld. Then the spirit told him he had not reached Odinsaker, which lay beyond and was so fair that the tower and the land over which it was suspended seemed dreary and unlovely in comparison. But no man who ever went thither could return again. It was the prince's choice, however, to seek his fatherland, and when he returned and told of the wondrous things he had beheld, he was called Eric the Far-Travelled. Helga Thorson also visited the glittering plains. In a great forest he met Gudmund and his 12 daughters, who were clad in scarlet robes, and rode upon stately steeds harnessed with gold. Ingeborg, the fairest of the maids, was moved with love towards Helg, who remained with her for 3 days. A great tent was erected and a feast prepared. Rich were the dainties, and the dishes were of silver and gold. Took his departure. He received much treasure from Gudmund, and he returned with it to his sire. Nor were men ever told whence it was attained. There came a great tempest on Yule night, and in the midst of it 2 strange men entered the dwelling of Helg's sire, and took the young man away. When a year had gone past, Helg appeared again with 2 men, and stood before King Olaf Tryggvason in his feasting hall. The strangers gave to the monarch 2 great drinking horns, which were decorated with gold, and said that they were sent to him by Gudmund. These were then filled with mead, and the bishop blessed them, but when the horns were handed to the strangers, they threw them away. Then the fire went out. Every light was extinguished. There was clamor and confusion in the feasting hall, and the guests were terror-stricken. Afterwards it was found that Helg and the strangers had vanished. Then were prayers offered up for Helg's return. At next Yuletide the strangers came back with Helg unto the king, and immediately went away, leaving behind them the young man, who was stricken with blindness. He told that he had spent happy days with Gudmund, but he was forced to return because of the prayers which they offered up. Ere he parted from his spirit bride, she made him blind, lest his eyes should ever gaze with love upon the daughters of men. Now after Helding, son of Helfton, had slain the sea dragon, he had strange adventures. He rescued from a great giant Runhild, the fair daughter of the king of Nithari, and she became his bride. One evening in midwinter, while they were feasting together, a spirit woman rose up, and she bore with her a bunch of white cowbanes, freshly plucked, and she asked Helding if he had desire to behold the place where they grew. The young king answered her that he would fain see it, whereat she flung her mantle over him, and together they disappeared. 'Twas thus it came that Helding set forth to journey towards Hela. He went through a dark land, and black were the mists about him, while the air was ice cold. Then he came to a road which was daily trod by many feet, and he walked on it until he reached a swiftly flowing river, which was filled with sharp and pointed weapons. With his guide, Helding crossed the bridge and came to a plain where two great armies contended in battle. Thus did many men who were sword-slain upon the earth choose to live in Hela, where they performed again their deeds of might and fell without fear. At length the woman took Helding towards a place which was surrounded by a high wall. He had already gazed from afar, as he descended the hills, upon the beauties of the enclosure, where grew the flowers, which were plucked in midwinter, and stately beings in robes of purple had blissful dwelling. The old woman tried to leap over the wall, but was unable to do so. She, however, showed Helding that the place within was indeed the land of life. She seized a fowl which she carried with her, and flung its head, which she wrung off over the wall. The head was speedily restored again, and the bird crowed loudly. Helding thereafter returned again unto his own land, and he endured many perils upon the way. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales, many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy